That the reason why Hashem kept us in the desert for 40 years, because if we would have gone immediately to Eretz Yisrael, what would have been with the Torah and the mitzvahs? We would have been preoccupied with our vineyards and with our fields, with all the agriculture. So Hashem kept us for 40 years in the desert. And as a result of that, the Torah had time to percolate and to be absorbed within us. We were in the spiritual cocoon for 40 years with the mann and the bear and the clouds of glory. That's why he kept us for 40 years in the desert. But factually speaking, there was many things happened. There was a chet Eigel, there was the chet Meraglim, who were there for reasons. So, meaning the only reason why God gave us certain challenges. The Eigel was a challenge. The Meraglim were a challenge. Are you going to listen to Yeshua and Kalev, or are you going to listen to the 10 spies? Only because God knew they would fail. But of course, that was their choice, that they would fail. Therefore, you're going to be wandering for 40 years. Because God just can't keep you out of Mitzrayim, out of Canaan, unless there's a reason why that you failed. But what is the objective? The objective is the positive result. Because we should be in the desert for 40 years to be in the spiritual environment, so the Torah should be totally, fully integrated, absorbed, and internalized due to the setting. Okay, that's what we said. So if you think about it, God creates Adam gives him a challenge. Don't eat of the tree of knowledge. God knew he was going to eat of the tree of knowledge. That means there was plan A and plan B. If he would have met the challenge, everything, the world will reach its level of perfection, as the Orachim quotes the Zohar. According to one opinion, according to Reb Meir, what was the fruit of the tree of knowledge? It was the grape. And because he ate the grape, therefore, everything follows. And we're still contending with it today. But if he wouldn't have eaten of the grape, he would have taken the grape, squeezed it, and he would have said Kiddush on the grape Friday night. That's the Zohar. But God knew he was going to fail. So plan A was never even a consideration. That means he created the human being knowing he's going to fail because the plan is plan B. The human being was not created perfectly. God created this imperfect being, but it still was within his ability to make a choice. He chose to do the wrong thing. Now that he chose to do the wrong thing, we have plan B. But God knew there was plan B. Plan A didn't stand the chance because God knew in advance he's going to fail. But he gave him that challenge because man, being imperfect, has to perfect himself. I'll give you an example. The famous debate or argument between Rabbi Akiva and Tonus Truppus was the Roman governor who put Rabbi Akiva to death. And they would always have these public debates. And Tonus Truppus says to Rabbi Akiva, famous Chazal, whose action is more perfect, God's or man's? This is what this pagan Roman asked Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says, man's. Man's action is more perfect. So the Roman government's like, taking it back. I mean, you believe in God, and you believe this. How could you say such a thing? He says, could man create heaven and earth? He says to Rabbi Akiva says, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that's within the ability of human beings, whose action is more perfect. So Rabbi Akiva says, man's. He says, how is that possible? He says, I'll give you an example. You plant a kernel, you plant a seed, and a kernel grows out of the ground. And you take that seed, that kernel, which is edible, and you mill it, and you turn it to dough, and you bake it into bread. What's more perfect, the finished loaf of bread or the kernel? So you see that man's action is more perfect than God's. So he says, so what's the takeaway? The takeaway is God created an imperfect world, and it's through man's initiative, he brings it to a level of perfection. That is the objective of creation. This is Reb Akiva says to Tonus Truppus, to this Roman governor. So he says to me, one thing I don't understand. If God created the person with a foreskin, what do you mutilate him? Why did God say you have to remove the foreskin? So Reb Akiva says to Tonus Truppus, you don't understand what we just said. God created man imperfect, The objective man is to perfect himself. By removing the foreskin, that's what brings about his perfection. That is the Chazal, that's the Medrash. So the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh explains, this Torah Shabbos was an intelligent guy. He was the Roman governor. And he gave him the example with the loaf of bread with the kernel. So what does he ask him question with the foreskin? He says, the kernel with the loaf of bread is obvious. Understand, the kernel is less perfect, and the bread is more complete, more edible. But if man is created with foreskin, what does removal of the foreskin have to do with perfecting of man? He says the whole concept of the spiritual realm, Ton Shabbos had no understanding. That the foreskin is an impediment of the spirituality of the Jew, and it's a result of the evil of the Eitz Hadas. He didn't understand all that. But what was Reb Kiva's? What's the point? God created an imperfect world, and through man's initiative, he has to perfect it. That's what it's all about. So therefore, we're given challenges. And the purpose of the challenge is that it's only through our own initiative, and if we choose correctly, we're the ones who bring about that level of perfection. So he gave Adam this challenge. And what was the objective? It was within his ability. He chose to fail. As a result of that, and God knew he was, it doesn't make a difference. But creation is that man should be the cause of his perfection, and he should be deserving because he took the initiative. And Ramchal explains, why was man given the ability to choose, and only through choice is he deserving? Because every relationship is based on compatibility, and just as God himself, he is what he is because that's what he is. The human being, to have a relation with Hashem, he has to assume a characteristic which is similar to himself to have a relationship. If God would just say, you'll do it naturally, my will. If that's the case, it's not related to you. It's being forced upon. It's like under duress or the equivalent of duress. Therefore, just as God does what he wants, God gave the human being the ability to do what he wants. And now if you meet the challenge, the reason why you're deserving is because that's your initiative. It's attributed to yourself. That's the concept. So the world creation was created for man to perfect himself. And how does he perfect himself? Through his own initiative, and he's given the challenge. So God gave Adam the challenge. He failed. Okay? But that was his choice to fail. That's the understanding. So now we spoke about we have to be 40 years in the desert. And it's now a best interest to be in the desert because we have to absorb the Torah for 40 years. And only in that setting are we able to fully integrate that Torah into our neshamos. So what does he gives us a challenge? First the Eigel, then he gives us the Meraglim. But again, because again, we weren't ready for real time to be able to be at that level, to go into Eretz Yisrael and everything else, we have to have challenges. He knows we're going to fail. When he took us, he knew we were going to fail. But Moshe, why did he strike the rock? God could have created a setting they shouldn't strike the rock. Because it was important for him to strike the rock that Moshe should not go into Eretz Yisrael. For all the reasons that we gave. And that's the reality of life. Every one of the challenges we're given is only because the end result is in our best interest. Every challenge. And we failed. The reason why God knew we were going to fail, and he created the challenge to be that challenge. So whatever the end result is, it's because we've chosen to fail, whatever it is. So I've been thinking about it since yesterday. What's going on in the world? All the anti-Semitism. The world is going against us. Everything, whatever that is. Now, how do we contend with it? Here, Trump seems to be for us. Now, all of a sudden, he's changing course a little bit, and he's forcing all the concessions down Netanyahu's throat. Gaza, this, that, the world. Who knows? Someday, Trump may become our enemy. Who knows what's going to be? Do you know what's tomorrow's going to be? The man's unpredictable. But all this, what's going on now, is for us, these are challenges we have. What do we do? Do we have faith? Don't we have faith? But that's the challenge. And if you have faith despite that, then you've met the challenge. Hashem is the one who calls the shots. And this is what the challenges of life are all about. And that's the value of the challenge. And every challenge, I once mentioned in Chassam Sofer, a challenge is only a challenge if you have the ability and the capacity to meet the challenge. If you don't have the capacity to meet the challenge, it's not a challenge. It's too overwhelming. So anytime we're confronted with anything, we have to know initially we have the ability to see it correctly. And if we fail, it's because we've chosen to fail. Otherwise, it's not a challenge. We can't be held accountable for the failing. Hishtadlus is only if it's within your ability to be able to bring about the end result. And he gives the example with the rabid dog, right? If you could run and scale the wall to protect yourself from the dog and you stand there and you have faith, then you're God gave you the means to save yourself. What are you standing there? But if you can't outrun the dog and you run to escape the dog, but factually you can't, that's called desperation. That's an act of desperation. Because then what the person should do, you stop and you pray to God that he should save you. There's no other way. That's the initiative at that moment. Yosef, because he was desperate, he wanted to get out of prison, and he put his faith in that heathen, the Sarah Mashkim, the wine steward. That's the pasuk. David says, you can't put your faith in the heathens. So that is the reality of the Egyptian, as it says clearly. After the moment he had the interpretation, the dream, and he was restored to his position, it says, immediately, forget him. There wasn't even consideration he would even remember him. So why did he rely on him? The answer, he was desperate. Desperation is a lack of faith. A Jew should never be desperate. If you take initiative, you take initiative. But if there's not a chance that the initiative should have any value, that's not called initiative. That's called desperation. So today, I believe we've done what you do. The main thing today is tefillah. How do you combat world anti-Semitism? Okay, so you do whatever, tidbits. But what is the thrust of our ability? The thrust of ability is Akol Kol Yaakov. That's the thrust. Bring Jews should be, if you could influence another Jew to be a better Jew, to pray more, that's what it's all about. To give more tzedakah, to support the right causes, that's what it's all about. Okay, B'Shalach, Perek Yudal Pasuk Aleph. V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, V'yoshuvu v'yachlu l'fnei pi achiros. Speak to the Bnei Yisrael, and they should return, and they should camp before pi achiros. Migdol vein Hayom identifies the location between Migdol and Yom and the sea. Lefnei Baltzfon, before the Lord of the North. Nicho, opposite Sachnu Alayom. They will camp by the sea. Okay, let's see Rashi. The Yeshuvu Lacharev. They should travel in the opposite direction, meaning here they're escaping, they're fleeing. They should travel back towards the enemy. On the third day, they were traveling back towards the Egyptians to mislead him. That he should believe they're lost on the way. They're confused. As he said about Nevuchim, they're locked into the desert. Who's Pichiros? Who Pitom? Pisum and Ramses, Heroes, Al Shem Shenase Shem Nechorim. That's what we became free men. Okay, the Fnei Baltzvon, this is an important point. Who Nisha Mikola He Mitzrayim. We say, well, Hey Mitzrayim Nasa Shvotim. God says, among the deities of Egypt, I will bring judgment. So Rashi had said it earlier in last week's Parsha, that when God destroys a nation, he actually destroys also the deity that they believe in. So how did he incapacitate the Egyptians? What did the Makos show? That the deities, the powers in creation, the zodiac has no power whatsoever. God overrode all the deities. They became incapacitated. Okay? But that's the only deity God did not destroy. It still was fully functional. That they should believe that this deity, this power, is able to stand up against God. God, he misleads the nations only to destroy them. So he left this one deity to mislead Paro, that Paro believed this was his last ace in the hole. And therefore, the Jews are locked in, and there's still a chance. And believing there's still a chance, he's going after the Jews. Because the Jews seem to be, but this whole thing was a ploy to draw Paro into the sea, to destroy him ultimately. Okay? Now, we had said, while the plague of Borod was happening, Paro believed it was all over. And he said, Hashem will show you. That was the way he expressed himself. After the plague stops, what does he do? He sends out his team and they do a survey. What was left? He realizes the wheat and the spelt crop was not destroyed. So Paro says, you people are not going out. I mean, if you've been beaten so many times, how could you be so irrational? Even if God withdraws your choice, how do you, right? Even without choice, you don't put your hand in the fire. I mean, you've been hit over the head and smashed and reduced to rubble to such a degree. So the wheat and spilled crop hasn't been destroyed. But look what Egypt looks like after everything's said and done. Paro believed originally God is supposed to be the omnipotent one. Nothing is beyond his ability. So he asked the question to himself. When the Borod was happening, he believed everything was being destroyed. That means God is the all-powerful. He's the Almighty. All of a sudden he realizes the wheat and spelt crop wasn't destroyed. What does that mean? That means the God of the wheat and spelt, God does not have any dominion over that power. So God is not the ultimate. There are various powers, and he's not able to stand up against the wheat and spelt, the deity of wheat and spelt. That's why he didn't destroy it. But again, all this was only to delude him. That he should believe that, and it doesn't send him out. And what happens? What comes? The Arba come afterwards. This was the rude awakening. He only left the wheat spelt for the rude awakening, because now when the locust comes, what he believed to be his security blanket, it's out the window. It's gone. Okay? So continuously, he's showing him that he's a fool. That as much as he believes he understands what's going on, he doesn't understand what's going on. But now we're holding at the very end. This is the last straw. Every deity is destroyed. He leaves one. This is his last chance. His last hurrah over here. Only to mislead him. And proof of the pudding is the Jews, they're traveling in the opposite direction. So that's a confirmation that after everything's said and done, we still have, the shackles are still on them. They can't escape from the shackles. If that's the case, we're going after them. But of course, that was only because God hardened his heart. Hardening the heart is, although you understand there's a very serious downside, but you believe on something which is barely possible to succeed, but you know something? When you have no choice, you rely on you make that irrational decision. But if there be nothing to rely on, and I say go into the fire, nobody's going to the fire. Whether you have choice or not, you're not going into the fire. You got to be pushed into the fire. Over here, he relied on this irrational understanding only because he believed, because God took away his choice. Because if he would have had choice, any rational human being would not rely on this after seeing exactly what happened. That's the understanding. So over here, there's a Kli Yakar says something beautiful. Why did he leave this particular deity, the Baal Tzivon? So if you have been Gross Gadol Chumash, he says over here, Lefnei Baal Tzivon, Hu Nisha Mikol Elohim Mitzrayim, V'yesh lo Litin Tam. So the Kli Yakar says he wants to give a reason why, particularly this deity. Why was this deity left more than the others? V'nira. Shahoylem harbe avodah zorah, shavdu harbe mazolos. He said they worship multiple deities. About tzvon hainu avodah zorah shechoshu kimenu yushbal them zov rab panini. The Baal Tzvon had to do with wealth. He's the cause of all the gold and the diamonds they had. Moshe Nemar quotes a pasuk in Eov, mitzvon zov yoso. Where does gold flow from? It flows from the north. That's the Baal Tzvon. That deity has to do with wealth. The Hisha HaKadosh Baruch Hu davka avodah zorah zu la tosam shiomru shavodah zorah titva elbonom. This deity is coming to demand and make good on the claim. Because the Jews, they took the money. They said they're borrowing, and it's clear they're stealing it. So because we took the money, the wealth, illegally, dishonestly, therefore this deity is coming after us. Makos hits the paros adin olov. Lemor shebedin bo'olov. Regarding all the other plagues, he understood what the meter connected meter. Measure for measure. But why should we lose our wealth? Why? So therefore he believed, so the deity is here to make the claim against us. Not Bnei Yisrael mamona. They took it illegally. He says, if you take a look what's coming up, he had a change of heart when he heard they weren't coming. Why did he have a change of heart? Because of the wealth that he had lent them. Because they said they're borrowing, and now he realizes they took it. Now he says, I got him. We're going after him because they took the wealth illegally. Everything else is me, the connected meter. But why did he take our wealth? He said, you see, it says, normally we say, yeah, okay, but that's the main point. That's why it's the Baal Tzvon. Baal Tzvon is deed that has to do with wealth. We took the wealth illegally. Therefore, now we're locked in. We can't escape. We can't escape into wealth. But that's only to mislead them. And ultimately, they were destroyed. Even though the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that when Alexander the Macedonian, Alexander the Great, he set up a world court, like they got a world court today. And anybody who had a claim against any other nation, he said they should make their claim. So the Egyptians came and they made a claim against the Jewish people. What was the claim? That when we left Egypt, we said we borrowed all the gold and silver. We took it on loan, and ultimately we stole it. So the Jews owe us all this wealth. They have to return the wealth to us. And Alexander heard it. It was a good claim. And it says at the time when the Egyptians came, they had vineyards and they had fields that were planted and ready to be reaped and harvested. And Alexander says, I want you people to respond to the Egyptians. So initially the Chachamim were going to respond. And there was a person, there was a Jew, an ordinary Jew, a hunchback. And he says, let me go. And he says to them, if I fail, they'll say this ordinary hunchback came. Let's hear what the rabbis have to say. And if I succeed, so we've succeeded. So he comes before Alexander the Great. He says to him, it says in our Bible, it's recorded, how many years did we spend in Egypt? 400 years. How many Jews were in Egypt? We're talking millions and millions of Jews were there. And innocent people were enslaved, and they never paid us. We never received a wage. If you calculate the wage, amount of money they owe us, with all the wealth that we took, there's a tremendous balance. If that's the case, rightfully, we took the wealth. Alexander says to the Egyptians, you know something? The Jews are right. You got a balance to pay. What moment they heard that, they fled. They abandoned their vineyards, they abandoned their fields, and the Jews took possession of all their fields and all their vineyards. That's the Gemara. So again, Paro himself, the way we're saying that, Baal Tzvon is the deity which all wealth comes from them. Because we took it illegally, therefore there's a claim. But according to what the Gemara says, if you make the calculation, there's no claim. Rightfully, we were never paid. Innocent people were enslaved. We have a right to demand a wage. This is, this is like we want to call reparations over here, beyond reparations. But, so you could say that's part of the Yelsik Hashem Slave Paro. That's part of it. He didn't see it exactly, sufficiently accurately. And as a result of that, he believed that's what the deity, that was the only deity that God left in place.
So that's similar to the...
Yeah, done in the north. Right, you bring a chatos, an osham, an olah. These are all kochi kadoshim. That's all in the north of the sanctuary. You don't do it in the south. So why? Because again, since this is directly to address the sin, the only reason why the north has the power to come against us, because Bavel, it says the problem will come from the north. What's the north? Bavel, Babylon, Iraq is in the north of Eretz Yisrael. Why do they have the ability to come against us? Because we have sin. So therefore, we have to address the north to address the sin through bringing korbanos. And once that's put away or dealt with, we're not vulnerable to that attack any longer. That's why Kochi Kadoshim is the northern part of the sanctuary for that reason. The Chatas, the Oshim, and the Olam. Exactly is like Paro. And I will harden his heart, or strengthen his heart, Viroda Vachreim, and he will pursue you, chase you, Vikovda B'Faro B'Chochelo, and I will become glorified as a result of that through Paro and his army. V'yodu B'Tzrab Kenei Hashem. V'yasufim. And then the Egyptians will know that I am Hashem, meaning this is the totality. This is the last deity, but ultimately, after everything's said and done, they realize this whole thing was a ploy, was a deception. This is Vayasuchein. Take a look at Rashi. Vayasuchein, Lagit Shvochem. What does it say, Vayasuchein? And the Jews did exactly what Hashem asked. They traveled in the opposite direction towards the enemy. Shishamu l'kol Moshe. They could have said, look, here we're fleeing. And they're coming after us. How can we go back? They had a sufficient degree of faith in Hashem. They have nothing to worry about. They didn't say to Moshe, how do we go and travel in the direction towards the ones who are pursuing us? This is totally irrational behavior. What did they say? All we have is to follow the words of Ben Amram. Moshe Rabbeinu. That's v'yasuchein lagish shvochem, to speak about the praiseworthiness of the Jews, that despite it seems to be totally irrational, it's only irrational if you don't understand. But if you understand who your backer is, that's not irrational. Now, we find Avram Avinu, he was the disseminator of monotheism in the world. What happened? There was a battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, and the 4 kings were victorious over the 5 kings. So what does that say? They were the world powers. The captives of the 5, one of the captives was Sodom. King of Sodom, his community. They were all taken prisoners of war, and they became the chattel. But why did they take Lot? Why did they take Lot as a captive? Because they wanted to bait Avram Avinu. Because they knew Avram Avinu is a fanatic, and the man behaves irrationally, and he's coming after Lot to save him. And once he comes after Lot to save him, we're going to kill him. So the Maral of Prague explains, what does the number 4 always represent? 4. He says, if a person is encircled on 3 sides, and you have a route of escape, you still have a chance to escape. If you're encircled on all 4 sides, you know what that represents? That's called total opposition. The 4 kings, that the Torah makes it a point, there were 4 kings against Avram Avinu. He was totally opposed. And that's why Avram was called the Ivri. Why was he called the Ivri? He took on the world single-handedly. The whole world was against him. He was surrounded on all sides. And they understood his mentality. The man is a crazy fanatic. If they take Lot, what happens? Avram's coming after them. And this is the chance we're going to kill him because there's no way he could stand up against the mightiest powers of the world. But little did they know that who's Avram's backer. If you understand who God is, you can have all the powers in the world, means nothing. And he was the victor because he understood that. The Jews understood now that they are the victors because who's their backer? Because Hashem's the backer. That's Lahagin Shvochen Shel Yisrael, to speak about the praiseworthiness of the Jews, that they came to the understanding that that Moshe's word is the word of Hashem, and therefore there's nothing to worry about. And they're traveling even back towards the enemy. That's to speak about the praiseworthiness. It's going into the fire and understanding you're not going to get burnt. You're not going to, how's it possible? Paro's coming with his cavalry, with his chariot corps, everything against him. Doesn't make a difference. Without that, I can't discuss it today, but after the sea closed on the Egyptians, the Jews were concerned that maybe the Egyptians didn't perish in the sea, they're coming around the other side. So what did Hashem do? The sea spit out their remains on the seashore. And when they saw the remains of the Egyptians on that they were all dead, Ozi Hashem Moshe Bnei Yisrael. By Midbar Hashem Moshe Abdo, they said the song of the sea. Now, when it spit out the Egyptians, even the chariots were spit out. And what were the chariots? What were they bedecked with? With gold and jewels and diamonds. And it's Chazal tell us the Bizas Hayam, the spoils of the sea, were greater than the spoils they had taken out of Egypt. Now the question is, why did Paro cover and bedeck the chariots with? Well, first, what wealth was this? It says when they left Egypt, they didn't leave a morsel of wealth left. Every bit of wealth was taken from the Egyptians, right? So the understanding is that was the wealth of the populace. There was the government wealth. Yosef had accumulated all the wealth of the world. This gold and diamonds, that was part of Paro's. That was the government wealth. But why did Paro bedeck it? Because the Egyptians, the way I understand it, why are the Egyptians going after the Jews? Why did they agree? If you lose 10 out of 10, you lost. You got to be out of your mind. And it says Paro had to convince them. If I'm going, you come with me. But what was part of the convincing? You should go after your wealth. And to show you that you have we're going to regain it, because I'm taking my wealth and I'm covering all the chariots and I'm taking a chance, because if I go, I'm giving up everything. Evidently, if I'm willing to give it up, that means I'm not giving it up. We're going to have victory. And if we have victory, you're getting back all your wealth. That's the reason why he covered the chariots with all the diamonds and the gold, for that reason. They're going after him because of the wealth, but if it's a lost cause, what's the point? So Paro had to cover it, bedeck his chariots with the wealth, his wealth, to show them, no, it's not a lost cause. Because otherwise what I'm doing, it doesn't make sense. It's good money after bad money, and it's guaranteed I'm losing it. So what's the point? The answer is no, we're going to win. To prove I'm going to win, I'm putting all my eggs in this basket. And that convinced the Egyptians to come along with him to try to regain and retake the wealth that was taken from them.